Yo, Shortbox Nation. Hello again and welcome back. Thanks for being here. And thanks for pressing play today. All right. You guys know how it goes. You guys initiate this wonderful exchange that we get to do every week by pressing play, and I appreciate that. Now, if you're new, welcome to the show. My name is Bodder, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about your favorite comics with the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making them. This is episode 439 and is brought to you by two amazing benefactors that make this show possible. The first shout out goes to the kick-ass fans and supporters who make up our ever-growing Patreon community. If you like what you hear on this podcast and you want to support the show in a more direct way, consider joining the ranks of the Shortbox Elite at patreon.com/theshortbox. You can support the show and help me keep the lights on and pay all these podcast bills that go into running this show for as little as $1 a month. And in exchange, I'll give you bonus episodes, early access to everything I do, and free comics and Shortbox merch. Go to patreon.com/theshortbox to sign up. One more time for the folks in the back, patreon.com/theshortbox. Big shout outs to our existing and future patrons. And last but not least, the Shortbox is powered by Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville's premier location for comic books, collectibles, toys, and more. If you live in Jax, or if you ever find yourself in Jacksonville and you're passing through and you're just looking for something to do, go visit the shop for yourself on Southside Boulevard, right next to Tinseltown Movie Theater, and tell them that I sent you, all right? Tell them that Bodder from the Shortbox sent you, and I guarantee you'll get hooked up some killer deals. That's at Gotham City Limit Comic Shop. And speaking of Gotham City, that ties nicely to what we'll be talking about this episode. Coming up on the podcast is Scott Snyder, one of the most recognized and celebrated Batman writers of all time. Scott Snyder cemented his place among the all-time great Batman writers thanks to his highly acclaimed run on Batman in 2011 for DC's New 52 initiative alongside co-collaborator and artist Greg Capullo. His New 52 Batman run not only propelled him into the stratosphere of comic stardom, but it also led to other writing opportunities on other popular DC series like Swamp Thing, Justice League, and DC's Dark Knight Death Metal. And let's not forget about the slew of award-winning indie and creator-owned projects under his belt, like one of my personal favorites, American Vampire for Vertigo. He got Witches and Undiscovered Country for Image Comics, and then he had that groundbreaking deal with Comixology just 3 years ago, in 2021, to write 8 original Comixology digital series, including Barnstormers with the extremely talented artist Tula Late, which won them both an Eisner Award in 2023 for Best Digital Comic. Now, despite the awards and accolades from fans and critics alike, he shows no sign of stopping because he's on the show today to talk about his brand new Batman series called Absolute Batman. And issue 1, and good news, issue 1 is in comic shops by the time you're hearing this episode. So once again, this is another interview where you could be driving to the shop while listening to this to go pick up said book that we'll be talking about and having a complete comic book experience, all right? Absolute Batman is part of DC's brand new all-in initiative, and it's set in the newly minted Absolute Universe, which is an alternate DC universe that features bold new visions of DC's biggest icons like Superman and Wonder Woman, and in this case, a new version of Batman like we've never seen before. I want you to imagine a Batman without the mansion, without the Batcave, or the money, or the butler, and the usual cast of rogues and supporting characters we all know and love. And I want you to add about 100 pounds of muscle and a whole bunch of spikes. All right. And that's what you get. You get the absolute Dark Knight. Along with Scott on writing, you got Scott on writing duties for this new title. You've also got the iconic artist Nick Dragata providing artwork on the covers and interior. You got colors by the incomparable colorist Frank Martin and lettering from one of the best letters in the game, Clayton Clowes. With all that said, wow, this is now, look, listeners, as you can tell, this is a much longer intro than I normally do, but we're talking about Scott Snyder, all right? He's on the podcast today to talk about writing this radically new version of The Dark Knight and to explain just what it takes to create a new Batman for the modern age of today. So, without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome Scott Snyder to the show. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show. Welcome.
Hey, Bodder. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this one.
Thank you. Yeah, I just feel like I just ran a marathon. But
it was a great intro. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
Far less than that, but thank you.
You know what, Scott? I think you would. I think you would get this. I think you might appreciate this. I strive when it comes to those intros. I am hugely inspired by Fat Man on Batman, Kevin Smith. Right?
Yeah.
Like it is. It is one of three podcasts that I contribute to. You know what I do and how long I've been doing it. He's like a big inspiration for me. And you were an early guest on Fat Man and Batman. I think when like New 52 was announced, or
Yeah.
shortly like after Court of Owls. And I gotta say, your interview along with Jim Lee's and Paul Dini's are like in my top three comic book
Oh,
interviews.
thanks. Kevin was amazing. I mean, he just makes you feel so at home. You forget you're doing an interview. He's just like so engaged, and he's so funny, and he just makes you feel like so at home at Secret Stash or wherever you
Yeah.
are, that it's just like easy to talk. So it was great. I was just like going back and forth with him like last year about trying to do it again.
Oh, that's awesome. Hell yeah. I'd be down for that. What petition we got to sign?
I know, right? I just have to make it to Jersey. It's just I had less kids last time I did it, so it's a harder trip to make.
I gotcha. Well, look, Scott, I want to go ahead and start off by saying congratulations on the pre-orders. We're recording this on Tuesday,
Thanks.
October 1st. Just a couple of days ago, I think on the 27th of September, there was a Bleeding Cool had announced that the, I guess, pre-orders for Absolute Batman #1 had already hit or surpassed 250,000. So 250,000 copies have already been technically sold as of the 27th of September. I'm sure that number has probably exponentially grown in the past couple of days, but I just want to say congratulations on that. And I guess get your opinion on, like, what is it about this title that has garnered 250,000 copies already sold before the issue has even hit? I mean, I know that the name Batman obviously will move units already, but in your opinion, like, what else is at play here? Like, what makes this the right time for an all new Batman?
I'm waiting for my mom to admit that she bought like 249,000 copies of it. But no, I'm really humbled. Like honestly, I signed up to do this. Like everybody that knows me will tell you, like my plan wasn't to do Absolute Batman at all. I wasn't sure I'd ever go back to a Batman title, but the way that All In came together is an initiative for all of Shortbox Nation, everybody listening. Like what we wanted to do was create like a moment when you felt welcome into DC, and we'd provide you with every single kind of superhero comic possible. We'd provide you with like bold new reinventions of the characters and great continuing series that honor the kind of classic takes, everything at once. And where it came from was I spent the last 4 years plus doing creator owned books, like you said, sort of away from superheroes after like a long 10 years in superheroes, which I loved. I loved being at DC, but I promised myself that after 10 years, I'd go out and just sort of build my own treehouse. And what that allowed me to do really was enjoy superhero comics from a distance, not feel the pressure of working in them while I was reading them. And I'm reading all these great series like Venom and Immortal Hulk and World's Finest and Nightwing and on and on and on. As that's happening, there's this cultural conversation going on about how superheroes are over, or superheroes have kind of peaked, because of the cinematic universes reaching their climaxes, and then the wait for them to be kind of renewed, like it's happening at DC. And it was really frustrating. It felt like these characters are not only alive and well in comics, but they're living some of their best stories. And it gave me this idea because DC had always been really kind to me, and so was Marvel, about inviting me to do a book here or there. But I really felt like the thing I wanted to do was be part of something like these great initiatives that I got to experience when I was at DC a couple times throughout that decade. We did one called the New 52, like you mentioned, back in 2011, and it was all about like rebooting and doing brand new takes on the heroes. And then we did another one in 2016 called Rebirth. It was sort of at the other end of the spectrum, that was about going back to classic and reminding people how great these long tapestries of stories are. And so I started talking to people at DC, like Josh Williamson, who's an incredible writer, he'd done Flash, now he's doing Superman, about teaming up to do an initiative that would give, instead of thinking of those things, those impulses like classic and new as separate or opposed to each other, what if we did them at the same time? And we created one big line one big moment at DC where we'd create a universe where you could have those new takes on the characters, and we'd create jumping on points where every reader, whether you lapsed from DC Comics, never read a comic, or been reading the entire last 10 years, would have a moment of excitement where it would be like a new story is starting, there's some new creative teams, it's a big welcome. And so all of that was kind of where it came from. But my role in it was always very up in the air. DC hired me as a consultant, and I said I would write a book, but I didn't know if it would be in the Absolute Universe or the main universe. And so when I finally, what I got to do was fly out to California and talk to them a bunch and get everybody on the same page and say, look, we're going to do this in a year and a half, 2 years, and that'll give everybody enough time to get ready. Every creator time to sort of decide, is my biggest swing to continue the series I'm doing with a new story, to get to a new series, to do something in the Absolute Universe? What would that be? And, I kept going around pitching this. And the way I pitched the Absolute Universe, this new universe where we're taking kind of new directions with the characters, was this idea I had for Batman, where I'd said, an example of how you could do a book in the Absolute Universe is you take Batman and you try and make him more of what he is. You try and make him more intensely Batman, and pit him against things that feel really scary and real right now. And so that I kept using that as the kind of, you could do that if you wanted, but you could, pick any character you want. And so ultimately, and I'm sorry, this is like the longest answer in the universe, but hopefully it kind of, speaks to everything.
No, please set the groundwork.
Nice. The idea is essentially that, for me, I kept going around and telling people, take your biggest swing. Whatever your biggest swing is, that's what we want. Whether it's in the main universe or it's in the Absolute Universe, whatever your biggest story is. And so eventually my friend, James Tynan, who, like, my little brother in comics, he's amazing. He was the one that called me up and was like, you keep telling everybody to take their biggest swing, but the thing you keep pitching is this Batman story. And I was like, oh, I can't do Batman again. There's no way. And he was like, that's the scariest thing to you. You should do it. And so that's how it came about. And so the idea that it would sell the degree it's selling now, which is, like way, just, it's so far beyond anything we expected. I mean, I was hoping maybe to sell 100,000. So the idea that it's, it's as high as it is. And not only that, we got the sales today for Absolute Wonder Woman, and it's way over double what they had hoped.
Wow.
And that all-in special over everything's overperforming, just makes everybody internally so excited, because nobody went into this initiative, me or anyone involved, trying to make it about them or, how to shine the spotlight on them. It was all about, what can we do individually, take our biggest swing, but collectively all band together and create this moment at DC Comics where you as readers feel like you can come in and find any kind of superhero storytelling, from the boldest to the most classic, all happening at once. So I'm incredibly honored and thrilled, and every one of my friends, like, no one, like, I'm more surprised than anybody that the book is selling the way it is. And I'm just happy the other books are selling as well as they are, because, I was very afraid. I was like, what if I go on Batman and everyone is just completely sick of me and doesn't want anything to do with a Batman written by me at all, and that was a real fear. But it felt like, just do the story that you love, do the story you believe in, and hopefully they'll show up. And I have the best fans in the world. So grateful. Never expected it. And again, like, the biggest hope is that those sales will just drive sales on other books at DC and other books in superhero comics and comics in general.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just looking at the numbers, the fans have showed up in droves, and I think maybe it's indicative of what you had mentioned about the mission of Absolute, to kind of combat that kind of played out and tired a talking point of superhero fatigue, and I agree. I feel like we only contribute superhero fatigue, I think unfairly at that, to the movies, and we kind of lose sight of, like, where these movies come from, where they draw their inspiration. And I've always felt like superhero fatigue is so played out, because there's no such thing as, like, spy movie fatigue. There's no such thing as horror movie fatigue.
Horror movie fatigue, yeah, right.
Yeah. So I've always kind of felt kind of conflicted about that, but the numbers clearly state that people are excited for this, that that they're looking forward to it. And since we've kind of hit the ground running about the inception of the idea, I guess I want to ask about the creative team, because you've got some heavy hitters. I mentioned in the intro you got Nick Dragata doing interiors and covers, the A covers. You've got Frank Martin, colors. You got Clayton Clouds on letters. Can you talk about how you assembled this this powerhouse group? Because I was reading your interview, you and Nick Dragata's interview on Sketched, and he mentioned something about you had mentioned that you necessarily weren't sure where you were going to land book wise, but he kind of gave you an ultimatum. If you don't write it, he wasn't going to do it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we each did it to each other. So
Oh,
after James convinced me to do it, I was like, well, I'll only do it if the right artist is available. And Nick was the first person that I thought of. And the
what
reason,
Oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, it was great. I was about to say, so I appreciate you asking. The thing that brought him to mind was that he's got this incredible dynamism to the way he tells a story, where it's very sort of influenced by manga, and yet it also has this really grounded, almost Mazzucchelli year one inkiness and grittiness, and a real sort of, it's not as unmoored as some manga stuff in terms of it's like, it's not melodramatic unless except in the moments where you really want it to punch. It can be very subdued. And so that sort of elasticity, where it felt like it would have this freshness when action and stuff happened, it would feel really, really vibrant and really fast and out of control. And then when it was grounded and sort of character based, it could be really subtle. It just felt perfect. It felt like this really new kind of year one style. And Nick, I didn't know Nick well at all. We'd only met once, but we had exchanged emails. I really admired both his work, but also his presence in the community. He founded Creators for Creators over at Image, which I'm a part of, along with a bunch of people, which creates a fund for new comic book creators to sort of help support their first efforts in comics.
Oh, that's cool.
And so he's got this real conscience about, being an indie creator. He hasn't done a lot of superhero work. And so for me, it was kind of like, look, if I'm going to do this, I want it to be so different than what I did with Greg, artistically, in spirit, all of it, that it's not even really comparable. It's not about, this one trying to live up to that one or anything. They're just so different from one another that you almost don't compare them. And I called Nick. I was walking around my neighborhood, and it was over a year ago. It was summer, like, June or something of last year. And I told him the idea, and I was just like, I started telling him the ideas for the other books, just sort of being like, and this is what the Absolute Universe is. And he stopped me and he was like, please tell me you're talking to me about doing Batman. And I was like, I am. But, and he's like, and you're writing it? And I was like, I'm thinking about it. And he was like, well, I'll do it if you do it, but I'm not doing it if you don't do it. And I was like, unfortunately, like, I called you to be like, if you'll do it, I'll do it. So here we are. Right. So, and then he was laughing, we laughed, and it was like, all right, let's give it a shot. And Nick, it turns out, I thought he lived on the West Coast. He used to, but he's recently moved right across the Long Island Sound from me. And so he takes the ferry over every couple of weeks, and we just go into my studio and put the pages up on the wall. I've never worked like that with somebody, but he's such a purist. And what's really fun about working with him, if you see the aesthetic of the book, when you read it, it's so sort of comic book forward. It's not about like doing a big splash page to sell. It's not about what's glossy or it's just this really, really intense sort of dense storytelling. There's multiple panels a page. It's very thought out and designed. Everything is for story. It's just really immersive. And I love working with him. I mean, now we've become very, very close after the last like year plus. And he's just a fantastic person, fantastic partner. And, it's the same way I worked with Greg. And again, Greg was one of the first people I told about it when we were doing it. And he's always been incredibly supportive, and everyone should go check out what he's doing on Wolverine with John. It's amazing. But the spirit with Greg and with Nick was always like, there's no egos. Best idea wins. It's all for story. There's no, how do I show off? It's always about like what makes the best beat in this for and what do you think and always talking everything through. So we talk every day and I honestly think every issue gets better. I'm on issue 4 right now with him and
Hell
I'm
yeah.
like it's one of my favorites. That I've ever been a part of. So I'm deeply, deeply proud of it. And so Nick came on and then Nick has worked with Frank, incredible, incredible colorist on East of West. And so he asked if he could bring Frank in and DC was supportive of that. And Clayton has done so much amazing stuff at DC that I was like, oh, I hope we can get him. And then he came in and was like, can I do the captions, almost like notes? I was like, please do that. And so everybody's like bringing their A game to this book where it just feels like such a passion project. We all talk, like everybody is on the email chain. We all share. And with the Absolute Universe itself, we do a call every 2 weeks, me and Jason Aaron, Kelly Thompson, Jeff Lemire, Al Ewing. And we're inviting Pornsack Pinochet, Shay Grayson, and Dennis Camp also soon to be a part of all of it and just talk. Our books, we share in a Slack, everything. The whole goal is to just be like, we're making this universe for fun together, So it's got a great spirit. I mean, that's the thing I'm proudest of about the whole initiative is that, there's a lot of ways to make it about one book or to be like, hey, it's about me coming back to DC or it's about, this book with Josh, the All In #1, and let's just sell that and not care about anything else. But we really tried holistically to make this initiative sincere, where we flew out to LA a bunch of times, met with a lot of creators, read a lot of pitches, talked to a lot of people like about it, gave suggestions, but never forced anyone to do anything, tried to make it so that everybody was feeling like they were doing the thing they wanted to do to show off in October through December. And sometimes that meant like Tom King continuing the great story he's doing on Wonder Woman, but just starting a great arc like the one where the baby is born in October. Other times it meant someone like Tom Taylor moving over to Detective Comics and doing that, which he's, killing it on. I mean, you'll wait. I know he's killing because I've read it now, but you'll see in a couple weeks. But it was just always trying to embrace whatever anyone wanted to do and be supportive. So to see it all work where everyone's online talking about each other's books, the whole company feels united. It's just fun. It's something we're really proud to be a part of.
I want to get back to that collaborative aspect as well as the promotion of Absolute Universe. But really quick, I want to say that I have had the opportunity to read Absolute Batman twice. Tyler, big shout out to Tyler who helped us coordinate this
Best
interview. No, Tyler's the man. He gave me an advanced review or copy. I've read that twice, and I think I've read the Ash Can, I don't know, 5-10 times. One, I do hope that there comes out a director's cut comes out in black and white because I think something about that black and white Ash Can is chef's kiss. But everything that you're saying about like just this energy between everyone and this collaborative nature and everyone kind of putting their best foot forward, I want to say, Scott, it is very apparent in
Thanks.
Absolute Batman #1. It feels fresh. I love what you said about it just feeling like a dense story. I definitely got that vibe. I actually didn't realize that there was no giant splash pages to kind of like distract from the story. Not that it's really a distraction, but it's definitely a different storytelling. And I gotta say, Nick Dragata, he is a master at just making, and this is such a base compliment, but just making shit look cool, man. Like his knack for his knack for drawing like tech, and just giving it like an espionage flair, and just like the shadows he plays with, it adds to the entire mood. It really sells like this is a different feel for Batman, and this Gotham is just a different beast in itself. So I gotta say, the first issue, Absolute Batman, made me a believer, and I love that Absolute Batman and All In Special #1, which is also in shops by the time you're hearing this episode, listeners, that you guys are giving us adequate and ample pages, page sizes.
Thanks.
I think All In Special is 64 pages and Absolute Batman is like 48 pages.
$4.99. Yeah.
And exactly, like comic books aren't cheap, so I do appreciate that you guys are making it worthwhile and looking out for the readers. Now, I want to get back to what you said about everyone promoting, each other's books, and it really feels like everyone's in lockstep. And I want to put a spotlight, obviously, on you because I am someone that goes to League of Comic Geeks maybe twice a day. More than, I mean, I can't even count how many times I'm on
Great
that
site.
website.
Yeah.
It's a great site. I actually had the opportunity to interview the guy that runs it and makes it, Jordan Blanco, a
Nice.
year or two ago. Super interesting. So I love the website. It's been cool watching him grow it, add these features. But one day, I want to say last week, as I was kind of like gathering my research material, I go on League of Comic Geeks. I'm kind of seeing like the different covers, and I always scroll the comment section just to kind of get a vibe of like, what's the zeitgeist saying? What are other fanboys saying? And you know who I see at the very top of the comment section is you. You left a comment you're in the thread,
Good.
and yeah. So you're in the thread, and I'm like, Scott Snyder has a profile. Nah, this has got to be some rando that got the username and all that. But no, it is a verified account.
It's
You're
me.
on League of Comic Geeks. You're in the comment section. Answering questions. Promoting the book and getting people hype. And I gotta ask, like, is that common practice for you? Is that like a part of how you ramp up books and things, or is this more indicative of just like this new energy when it comes to like the absolute universe?
It has been. I mean, like what I try and do is, I mean, my belief is, you know, promotion is fun. Like I support anyone's engagement with promotion, and there are people involved in All In at every level, absolute every level, that have different sort of comfort levels with promotion. When I started in comics, I was very awkward with it. I wasn't comfortable going to conventions and speaking about the books. I feel like I, would go to a convention and drink too much because I was worried about having to go on a panel or that kind of thing. And so I'm very sensitive to the idea of trying. I'm sensitive to the idea of running an initiative that demands anything of people that they don't feel comfortable with. So, you know, but for me, like where I've landed with it is that I've come to really love that aspect of the job, because I feel as though when I love a book and I'm really proud of it, I like going out and talking about it. But the the um the kind of proxy to that, or like the thesis of that, is to try and always be as honest as you can with fans about the nature of that book and do promotion that matches what that book is. So when I do a book like, White Boat, or I do a book like Yet with Distillery, I try really hard to go out and press horror people and go to the horror community and go with people that have really liked the books that I've done with Francesco before. White Boat is like a horror book I'm doing with Distillery about, it's kind of our take on the island of Dr. Moreau. And I love the book. And I'd hold it up against, the best stuff that I've done. And Francesco is killing it, but it's not absolute Batman in the way that I'm not trying to do, 5 or 20 variant cover sort of, or retailer variant covers, and doing a whole, because I don't think that that's the kind of book it is. It's definitely a book that's really commercial for what it is. It's a big horror book. But a better example might be something like Book of Evil, which I did with Jock for Comixology, because White Boat's more commercial and is actually like is a good seller. But like a book like After Death that I did with Jeff Lemire, right? Or a book like Book of Evil, they're mostly prose and they have spot illustrations. They're not going to be for everybody. They're experiments. Like Barnstormers was an experiment. And you always try and be really honest with your fans and say, like, look, this is what this book is. It's not going to be for everybody, but I love it dearly, and this is why I love it. And you go to the audience that you think will like it, and you don't try and oversell it. When it comes to something like this, like Absolute Batman, that's carrying it, it requires, you going out there and being absolutely a juggling bear on a unicycle on every level across the comic space, because it's not just this book. It's this book as a bellwether for the whole thing, that you're trying to say, I'm taking my best swing. I'm out here talking about it, and it is indicative of the kind of thing that everybody is trying on their own book in their own way across the line. So for me in that situation, that means like every sort of opportunity to get in the spotlight and talk not just about Absolute Batman, but All In, I'm going to be out there doing it. So it is something like I have not been on League of Comic Geeks talking about books before. I've been there like to use it for everything,
Yeah.
but I haven't actually engaged that. Same thing. Like I haven't done as many interviews. I haven't been to as many conventions. I haven't done as many signings, all of it for Absolute Batman. Not because I care more about that book than I do about other ones, but because that book that's the kind of book that supports that sort of promotion that you got, it's about getting fans excited about not just this book, but about all of DC Comics at this moment, and trying to be really honest and be like, this is why I love this book. This is why I love the whole initiative. This is why I'm out here crowing about it. Like, go try it out and put your money where your mouth is. I believe in the book and I believe in the initiative. Otherwise, like, I wouldn't be out there.
I think it makes a world of difference to see you this upfront, in the trenches. And I use air quote that, but like, everywhere that you're at promoting the book, but also promoting other titles going on, whether that be Absolute Wonder Woman or Absolute Superman. Like I was scrolling through your Twitter feed today and yesterday, and I gotta say, like, I think there's definitely something to be said about your knack of promo, but also putting the spotlight on, your collaborators and your peers and colleagues.
Thanks.
And it got me thinking, like, man, this is a guy that has been in comics since, I don't know, 2009, 2010, and has worked with so many different names, and you're probably friends and colleagues, and you've got so many peers and etc. And I'm just curious, who would you say like really pushes you? Because you mentioned earlier about, like, you were in this space, you were focusing on what did you say, like building your own treehouse, doing the creator owned stuff, but you were also still reading, like, your Venoms, your Immortal Hulks. And it got me thinking, like, who is Scott Snyder's competition? And I don't mean that, like, with Venom, but I mean, like, who pushes you? Like, who do you look around to your left and right and you're like, okay, I want to be that, I want to be on par with that. Like, what are some names?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I don't think in those terms necessarily. Like, I love being inspired by books. Greg Capullo always teases me because I do this class, through Substack, and
Yeah.
I've taught like my whole career, and I love teaching. And he's always like, "You're teaching your replacement." And I'm always like, "Not not if I do it right,"
Wow.
because for me, if you're teaching people to, the way I run the class is always about, like, the golden rule is you've got to write the story that, like, you would love to pick up that day on the rack. And that means finding your voice, your story. So it's not teaching you to write like me, it's teaching you to write like you, and just showing you all the craft tools, like, and that. And so when it comes to competition, I don't really think of it as like, I'll read something like that's totally different than what I do, right? Like what Daniel Warren Johnson is doing with The Moon is Following Us, like right now, or what he did with Do a Power Bomb, or what Patrick Horvath did with Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, or what Tom and Bruno were doing on Nightwing, or what, I mean, there's so many examples. James Tynion and Martin Simmons on Department of Truth. I mean, just there's so many good comics, that what it does is I'll read it and be like, I want to be as good in my way as they are in their way. And it inspires me not to try and do what they do, but to think of what is the thing that makes me scared and excited to go right. And the people that I keep around me, to be totally honest, but it's like, about her, is like those people. Like Jock is the one I'll never forget. Like, Jock was the first big star to ever take a chance on me with Black Mirror. And the reason he did it was he was like, you're going deep for this one, about like things that I was worried about. And every project I do with him, like this one I'm doing right now for Distillery, like You Won't Feel a Thing, it's really personal. It's just about, it's not, it's a book I called him and I'm like, I had this, again, not to get too on the couch, but like this last summer was probably the worst of my life in terms of work. I'm doing this Witches animation writer's room and I love it. I love the show. I love the people in it. But the writer's strike pushed the season 2 writer's room right on top of all the DC All In stuff. So I had scheduled it all out so I'd have time to be with my kids and my wife over the summer. And because it all landed on top of each other, the summer was just like, I've never been as buried in work as I was this summer. And I just felt like I missed everything with my kids. So when Distillery was like, we want, what do you want to do for your next book? I came up with this idea about a guy who is he's sort of like an ex-federal agent, and he's got early onset dementia. He's in his 60s, and so he's sort of in an assisted living facility, too young. He's in his 60s, but not old. And he's feeling really regretful because he had this very illustrious career catching criminals, but he doesn't have a good family life. Like, he's kind of foregone everything with his family over the years. And he starts to believe that the killer that started his career might actually be from this town that he grew up in, where he is in this assisted living facility, and might still be here and active. And so he goes to try and solve this case that has sort of spanned his whole life. And it's got a serial killer with a mask with teeth in it, and like, it's all kinds of horror. But at a core, what it's about is somebody who really worries that they spent time working on their career and they're still doing it at the expense, trying to get that one last case, like the one big Batman hit, right? At the expense of what really matters. And the people I keep around me, like Jock and Greg and Rafa and Francesco and Nick now, but my recurring collaborators really like are the people that make you do that kind of work, that hear that idea and say, do that thing. James Tynan, same thing. Do the thing that scares you the most. My student, he used to be my student when he was an undergrad, and now he's like my teacher, right? But it's like that feeling of, those are the people that I keep around me, are the ones that are going to be honest with me and criticize me and say, you need to do that thing that you're afraid of. Jeff Lemire, those people really. And the people I worked with at Comixology, Tula, Lisa, who's like a dear friend for many years, who's the first person, with Thought Bubble, she runs the Thought Bubble Con, and invited me when I was, just starting out she was like, let's do a book where we jam on it and you give me your ideas and I give you mine, and we'll make something that's just the two of us. And it was this wild experiment, and it's one of my favorite books. But finding people that push you, that make you scared about what you can do and bend the limits of what you think you're capable of. So that's what, when I read and those are the people I approach. So like Dennis Camp, for example, as somebody brand new, right? When I read 20th Century Men, I thought it was great, and it was so daring. And then I read or Ram V, when I read the Savage Shores, and that like, they're people that I immediately, like, I know it's corny, but like, I'll write them and just DM them, I love your book, I thought it was great, it really made me want to write better, blah blah blah, and like, sincerely. And like, I like surrounding myself with those people. And then, Dennis is doing a book for us in Absolute. Now I become friends with him. Ram has become someone I consider a close friend, and his New Gods book is going to kill it in DC Ellen. So I gravitate towards people that are going to challenge me and make me want to write better. It's why I became friends with Tom King. Initially, when I read Vision, when he was still at Marvel, I wrote him. Donny Cates, when he did God Country, I wrote him. Like, I like that. Like, I like reaching out to people that I'm not threatened by it. I'm not, I have my moments. Everybody does. But in general, I'm not threatened by people coming up doing something that I'm really impressed with, because I'm a deep believer in, like, there's no other me and there's no other them. It's more like them doing their thing makes me want to do my thing harder. And that's Absolute Batman, is me doing my thing as hard as I can, over here.
Man, I am just, that is awesome to hear, that you don't have this colossal ego, even though, let's be real, I think it could be warranted. All the accolades I was giving you in the beginning, I think could easily have morphed you into this, ego beast. But I love hearing that it sounds like you read a lot of comics. Every comic you were listing off are like books that I revere, that I've probably had on my pull at some point, or have been told how good they are. So that is incredible to hear, that you are pretty up to date with, like, the comic zeitgeist and what's going on, and that you're not afraid to, like, give props where it's due. I think that just kind of, it's something about knowing that, these writers and these creatives that you admire as a fan and reader, that, that I guess there's something to be said about knowing that they get along and they respect each other also as fans. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is that it is awesome to hear that you are still a fan of comics, after all the success and all the years of doing them.
Oh, I'm super hungry, dude. Like it makes me young. Like I feel like teaching keeps me young. Like just reading young people's stuff coming in, and not all of them are young. Some of them are starting when they're in their 60s or so. But that hunger, like it keeps me hungry. I love it. Like it makes me feel like, I want to go, like as teaching too, like it reconnects you with your priorities. Cause when I'm out there saying like, you got to write the story that you'd love to find on the rack every day, I feel like a hypocrite if I don't go home and try and do that. And certainly like I have my moments when, I get overwhelmed or family life is a lot and that, but you try and keep that front of mind and just be like, go read your favorite stuff, go talk to somebody that's going to keep you honest, because at the end of the day, I know, and this sounds hokey, but I mean it sincerely, like on my kids. This job, like so few people get to do it. And it's what I wanted to do since I was like, 5, 6 years old. And so to get to do it, you can never phone it in. You can never take it for granted. Like there are 1,000 people that want it and, should have it. So you have to earn it every time you write an issue. Like it's the thing. Like I'm sure I have screwed up many, many issues and written bad things or things people don't like. But I go to sleep well at night knowing that like I promise it's not for lack of trying. I have not let an issue that I have solo written out the door, that I have not tried to make the best thing I could. I'm not the best writer in the world. I have a lot of like, I'm sure I've not lived up to it sometime, but it's not for lack of trying. And that's what allows me to be like, that didn't work, but you know what? I tried my best. And that, like knowing you tried your best, and I promise, like I'm trying my best. Like that, I say that as a joke to people that come up and they're like, I like this, or they have a critic, or whatever they say at a con. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm trying my best, like, but I mean it. I mean it. It's like
Guys,
Tyler will vouch for me. Like I spend way too long still going over issues. That's issue 34 of whatever, just because not because not because it's an ego thing or because I'm so this or that. It's really out of, I promise, like, I don't want to lose this job. Like, I want to be able to do this. I love doing this job. And I feel very, very lucky and grateful to get to wake up and go to my studio and make comics. Like, so few people in life get to do the things they love. And I always am grateful to the fans. And the way that you're grateful is by always giving it your A game,
what is it? What is it about the medium of comics that still makes you feel so strongly about it? Considering that you mentioned that you were in the working on Witches, the animated series, being in the writers' room. I'm sure that like you've dabbled in or even been offered to work on TV and movies.
Yeah.
And I guess it's really refreshing to hear that your heart sounds like it's still 100% all in, no pun intended, into comic books. Like, what is it about the medium of comics that still drives you and still makes you such a fan?
It's the collaborative aspect of it, 100%, and it's the community. I mean, comics are the thing that I found when I was young that made me feel brave in like the face of all my anxieties and fears as a kid. Batman was that character. Growing up in New York City, it was Dark Knight Returns and it was year one. And, X-Men helped me through all my like teenage anxieties and like, so comics was always the place you went to sort of think you were escaping, but actually kind of face the things you were nervous about. But when I was in my 20s, I always wanted to be a comic artist writer. I wanted to be like Mike Mignola and Frank Miller, and I went all the way through college thinking I would do that, and then I just wasn't good enough at art, and I didn't know how to. I couldn't find classes like in comic book art, and I love writing, and I fell more into writing at that time. And so I started getting offers to do prose stuff, and I was like, you know what? I love Stephen King. I love writing, sure. And so I fell more and more into that world, and so my start. I came into comics through prose, where I had written a short story collection called Voodoo Heart, and it did, pretty well for me. And then I got a novel, so had a sort of, I was working on a novel, and what happened was I was working on this book, and it was essentially like it was some of the same material that's in Barnstormers, not not exactly, but it's of that time period. It was about a guy who is trying to fly across the country in a plane very early on to win a prize by William Hearst. It's like based on a real incident. And I was writing it, and I got married and had this book deal, and it was like I didn't realize that all of the money for a book deal is really weighted on when they accept the finished book, not when you first get it. And so I was a kid. I mean, I was like 20, I was 25 or whatever. And what I also didn't realize was like one of the fun things about writing prose was that when I did it and did that story collection, I was living in the city and I was surrounded by other writers who I'd gone to school with, grad school with, where I met my wife. And now we had moved out here where we didn't have any money. We were living in like a tiny condo, and she was in school for medicine, and I was alone all day working on this book. And I was just like, I hate this. This is horrible. Like I'm just working alone, and there's nobody to show this to or talk to or anything. And it suddenly dawned on me that like I didn't enjoy prose, and it was this horrible feeling of like, what have I done? And now if I don't turn in a good book, I'll never get the money and this. And then the economy contracted. It was 2006, 2007. And so the Random House was like, the book really has to, it's got to be something we really believe in for us to accept it at this point. And it was this miserable moment where I was just like, I was so depressed and like, what have I done with my life? And a buddy of mine did an anthology where he invited literary writers to make up new superheroes. And it was kind of like a lark, like just a fun anthology where you got paid like $100. And I was just like, I'll do that. And I remember my wife being like, why are you doing this thing that doesn't pay any money? And I was just like, I just want to write something for fun. And I took it really seriously, and I wrote a story called The 13th Egg that was like about a guy who's in the nuclear tests in the 1950s and starts to develop powers, and he's really torn about, is he good and bad? And I loved it. I had such a blast doing it. It was the most fun I had had writing in like 2 years because I'd been working on this book forever. And it got into the book, and then they did a release party for the book. And at the release party, there was an editor for Marvel and an editor for DC. And they came up to me and were like, we liked your story. Do you want to pitch? And I was like, of course, and then I was pitching, and I got a couple tiny gigs like Iron Man Noir and this, and it was like a couple hundred, like the whole thing was barely any money. And again, my wife was like, why are you doing this? And I was just like, because it's making me so happy. And I remember her being like, you've been miserable for like 2 years plus. Like, let's take out a loan. You seem so happy doing this. Like, why don't you go back to Random House and just be like, this book isn't working for you. You guys don't want to pay for it. Like, you don't like it. It's not going to be a bestseller the way you need in this economy. Let me go, and I want to do this. And I'll always be grateful to her. We took out this big loan, and I went and just pitched American Vampire, hoping it would get through, and it did. And so, for me, I remember what it's like to have a job, not just like, I worked a lot I taught high school and I tutored, I did all kinds of, like I work too. But I even remember what it's like to have like a job in the field you think you like that was not, you hate going to work every day. And so I feel so lucky that like I happened to get the chance to like wander into this thing and like get the job. And then I wandered in and they gave me Detective Comics out of nowhere. And I was like, oh my God. And like, so I've been so lucky. And so part of it might just be guilt where I feel like I'm like paying it back to be like, I promise I will earn my place in this. Just by, but I know I'm like giving you this like insanely long answer, but what I'm trying to say is that like, I won't ever take it for granted. Like this, I feel so lucky to get to wake up and do this. And the thing that I love about it is that it's collaborative. Like prose was lonely. And the minute I started working in comics, it's like suddenly it's you and an artist and a colorist and a letterer and editor making something together that you believe in out of thin air. And I didn't realize how much I love that because I was me and my friends making stories together before suddenly it becomes a job and you're living alone and working in alone. But comics is always you and your friends making stuff. Like, these are my friends. Like Jock is one of my best friends in the world. Greg is one of my best friends in the world. James, like, same. Like like Nick has become one of my closest friends, and that you're just making shit with people that you love, being like, it's you and me, like we're just, what are we doing like today? And there's just a joy to that, and just, it's only something the two of you could make, whether it's Sean Murphy or Tula Lotay or what. It's just like, let's make something that only the two of us could do, or the three of us or four of us. And that's the beauty of comics, is it's teamwork. And it's you creatively making something and trusting. It's a trust fall too, where you're like, okay, like I'm going to write this and then I don't know how it's going to come out, but like, I'm going to try and give you what you need to do your best stuff. You tell me how you like to work. And, whether it's full script or Marvel style, and then I'll give you that. And then you hand me back something and I'll do my best stuff on that. And you just keep going. Like, it's trust fall, trust fall, trust fall.
That was a fantastic answer, and I want to say we can go down those rabbit holes, absolutely, because I think it's important to hear the story, because you're a writer that injects a lot of his personal life, and you've mentioned several times so far, like, injecting, the things that you're afraid of, like your personal, your anxieties and things like that into your stories. And I think it's a big reason why I Court of Owls is one of my all-time favorite Batman stories, because you can tell that you injected so much of your personal self and your personality into there. And I think that stuff just resonates, when it comes from a human, and, it's real stuff. So, I appreciate the, you sharing a lot of that. And I guess on the topic of, fears and, injecting, your personal life into the story, I want to get back to Absolute Batman, because I understand that your approach for this version of Batman wasn't more so to tap into your personal, fears and, thoughts and, things going on in your life, but you also injected some of, well, I guess this Batman, the things that he's dealing with are more so representative of the things that you feel like your kids will be, will be
Yeah.
facing, the existential turmoil and the stuff going on in their lives, and, as they get older. Could you speak a little more about that, and get us, put us into the psyche of this new Bruce Wayne? Like, what are some of the things that he's going to have to overcome, the adversity and etc.?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like I said, I kind of wandered into DC and suddenly was like shot out of a cannon into Gotham. And I really felt like, working on Batman was the dream that maybe I would get to write a backup story after 10 years at DC. I didn't expect to be on Detective Comics like 3 months into my time at DC. And so my whole trip in Gotham was like a whirlwind of just white knuckling it, where it was like, I can't say no because it's my dream job, but I'm woefully unqualified for this. So I'm just gonna like spend every waking minute trying to make this good. And like it was crazy. It was a crazy first few years until it finally started to level out. But I really did just write about the things I was afraid of. So like, you know, a lot of it, when you look at it, and when I look at it now, I worry it's very transparent. But like Black Mirror, it's like Dick Grayson becomes Batman, and it's like, this is so fun and scary and amazing. And then Gotham transforms itself into being all of the things he's afraid of. And so it was like, I'm the new I get to write Batman. I'm so excited and scared. And then all of a sudden, here comes Gotham being like, you're not good enough. Let me show you why. And then, writing Court of Owls was similar. It was like, okay, now I get to write Bruce Wayne. I'm just feeling confident. I've just come off of like this run that I did okay with Jock and Francesco. And so Batman in that situation at the beginning of Court of Owls is like hyper confident. And then all of a sudden the history of Gotham comes to life and is like, you're nothing. And that's how I felt writing Bruce, because there's so many amazing stories in the history of Batman through Bruce Wayne. And then we were pregnant with our second kid with Emmett, and Death of the Family is the Joker being like, you don't want a real family. You just want me. You just want to. And it was a moment when I was like, like terrified that I cared more about my work than my kids. And so all of that is there. And then the only thing I never had on Batman was time. I had no break. It was every month for 5 to 6 years of just like, how do I make this issue stand up to the last issue? How do I make something that really is just the two of us doing the best thing we can. And it was very gut and instinctual all the time. And Greg is like a god at that. And so there wasn't time to like sit back and sort of plan things at length and deliberate over things. And so with this run coming off of it, what I realized was I was always just writing my anxieties and fears and hopes into Batman. But now as a father and having purchased, my kids are older, they're teenagers, looking at them going out into the world, they're at the age where I really fell in love with Batman, 12, 13. I mean, I loved him before that, but you know what I'm saying? Like when I really took Dark Knight came out when I was like, 10. So it was that era of like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, where I looked to comics to really inspire me. So it was like, well, what would Batman be if I wrote him for them as a proxy for them, the way I see them? And so it was like, well, I'd be Alfred, right? I'd be like the older guy coming in being like, oh my God, the world we've created for these kids, like I'm jaded, I'm compromised, I'm this. And then all of a sudden I see my kid, like my 17-year-old and his friends, and they don't see it that way. They see it as like, look, I'm not going to accept I'm not going to accept these kind of broken things you're handing me. I'm going to make it better. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to break it more so I can build something else. And there's an idealism in all of it, in the protests and the feeling of like, I demand more, a fire to them. And it was like, what if Batman is that? What if he's young, but he's huge? What if he's like this beast who's just like a primal force in Gotham who will not compromise? And that's where it came from, was that feeling of like writing Batman with them in mind instead of me. What if Batman is not me, or, going up against my fears? What if instead he's designed to sort of make them brave and be, them embodied, like the things I see in them and I'm so inspired by? What if he's that? And I'm no longer, he's not trying to make me brave anymore. Like this is written in a way where he is them and he is brave, and I'm watching as Alfred, learning from it, being like, and Alfred is jaded and he comes around. The whole first arc of the book, Batman is the star, don't get me wrong. Like Batman has a lot more screen time and a lot more amazing moments. But Alfred's arc is the arc of the first sort of section of the book, where he's like, trying to tell Bruce it won't work to do what you're doing. Like you will hit a wall. You're up against too many resources. And Bruce is like, I just don't care. Like my bat is an axe and I'm going to chop it down. So stay out of my way. Get in or get out. And he it's just that fun, bat out of hell craziness that I just adore about this Batman. He's just so different than the Bruce I wrote before. He's just like, he's fierce and independent and violent, but compassionate. He's all these things. He's just like this. He's so primal. It almost feels weirdly like it's how I always wanted to create. It's like it's so pure. I mean, the money and the resources and that stuff, that's fun, man. It's fun to make 10 Batmobiles in a Batcave, and it's fun to do those things. But when you boil it down, it's always a little queasy. Like it's always been something that, you try and figure a way around, or you try and, by day, we always did this thing I was proud of, where Bruce Wayne acted like Batman. Bruce Wayne did everything he could with his money all the time by day to help Gotham. And by night, he was Batman. So he's both sides of the same mission. Bruce Wayne wasn't a mask. Bruce Wayne in our run was always active, like civically minded. But that said, there's still sort of just a
kind of like contradiction still.
Yeah, there's a contradiction, because he still benefits, and what does Wayne Industries do? It's like very hard to pin down, without it without it becoming like, like again, queasy. So it's just kind of vague and big in comic terms. And I love him with the money. I love reading those stories. I'm not saying he shouldn't have it. But there's a purity to him not having it, where it's almost like I adore the fact that he's suddenly this folk hero who's coming up the other way, and he's like, I'm looking in through the glass window at those people. And I grew up with Edward Nygma and Waylon Jones and Oswald Cobblepot and Selena Kyle, and they're my friends from the neighborhood. And you know what I mean? Like they're not my enemies yet. They're my neighborhood kids. The way I had friends in my neighborhood, growing up in New York, and it was like that feeling of like we might grow apart, but like you're in it together. And so all of it is just new. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm taking away his money, because you've seen that story. It's more like, what if instead of being somebody who is, because what Batman is at core is, this character who takes the trauma of his childhood and turns it into fuel to be able to stop that thing from happening again, to make the world better. But in the context of the DCU proper, his villains are also the chaos that is the shooting in the alley, and he is in some ways the kind of order and system that tries to stop them. But in this version, his villains are the system in a lot of ways, like not Riddler and them, but the people he goes up against in our book are part of that kind of system. And instead, he's kind of the chaos and the anarchy. He's the monkey wrench, and he's friends with the people that are like rebels and that. And there's an energy to that just makes every scene new. It's funny, because I was saying to Nick a couple days ago, he was asking me about like some of my favorite things in our Batman run, and some of them are the things that everybody would cite as probably the scenes that they like. But anyone who likes our run, I mean. But there's also like a couple of my real favorites are like, there's a moment in Super Heavy where like Bruce Wayne has had his memory wiped, and he's starting to realize he was Batman before, and he doesn't know how to be him again. And he sits down on a bench at a pond, and the Joker, who also is human and had his mind wiped and the thing, sits down next to him. And the two of them have this conversation, not knowing that he used to be Batman, he used to be the Joker. But it actually cuts to the core of who they are. And it's not some scene that people ever cite as like their favorite thing that we did. But to me, it's one of my like three favorite things, because it was about the mythology. Like it was very much like a deep, for me at least, like kind of deep exploration of what these characters are. But it was done in a way I'd never seen. And those little moments when you can do something you haven't done, hasn't been done, but is also trying to speak on what Batman means, those are the things that are magic. The whole series feels that way to me with Nick, because it's just everything is uncharted. When you start from that inversion, and Batman no longer means the thing he meant, he's a different thing. But he's still Batman in true to core. He's still that core thing of trauma turned into empowerment. Like it all becomes like fresh and fun.
I love what you just said about the subversion aspect. Like I said, I've had a chance to read the advanced review twice now. I'm gonna go pick it up in stores because I need it without the watermark to really take in all of Nick Dragata's beautiful artwork. But I guess there's two things I want to highlight about this first issue that I really appreciated. The first one being the big, kind of action sequence where this new Batman is taking on, a horde of the Black Mask's, army. And he's sorely outnumbered, but he's also the biggest mofo among all of them. And there's something about the way Nick Dragata illustrates, and his choreography just makes so much sense that you want to keep replaying. Like if this was a movie, you'd keep want to replaying this scene. It's up to like John Wick level choreography, and I just love the action, the energy, the brutality of this new Batman. Like you can tell that he's got a chip on his shoulders, but it's not because it's hatred. It's not a hatred toward his enemies, but like what they represent. So I love that scene, and then I love a very minor scene. And I think it speaks to that subversion that you were talking about, where, yes, this new Batman may not have the money, the butler, the resources, but I love how cunning and how he just makes things work. And I don't think this is a big spoiler, but he doesn't have a bat cave. But in this version, you've got him as an engineer. So obviously he's working on buildings, and he makes his bat cave out of a hollowed out, the penthouse floor of this giant mega structure. And I thought that was such a nice touch, where he doesn't have the money, but he's taking advantage of like this corrupt system, and like these other billionaires. And I thought that was a really nice way to subvert like that whole flip of him not being a billionaire himself. And then also what you were speaking about as far as like This Batman being a representative or a proxy for, like, your kids and the next generation, I think gives it a lot of like youthful energy, and kind of succeeds in what you're planning as far as like making this a Batman for modern today.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you saying that.
So I wanted to shift gears, and obviously I've asked a lot of questions. And when it comes to these big interviews like right now, I like to share the spotlight with the listeners, the supporters of the show, the folks that tune in every week. And I reached out to a couple of folks to send in questions for you, Scott. And I think they're really solid questions.
Do
And
it.
I want to get your thoughts on these. So this first one comes from a member of the Patreon community. His name is Mac Jacobson, and he wrote in to the show, and he wants you to answer this question here. So for Mac Jacobson, he writes, "Hey Scott, Mac Jacobson here. Firstly, I want to say your run on New 52 Batman saved my life. I was going through a horrible time a few years back and was trying everything to get my mind off of all the troubles, all the trouble stuff going on. And I picked up your New 52 run in trades, and it absolutely helped me escape the harsh reality I was living in. It also reinvigorated my love for comics. Whenever I had suicidal thoughts, I read your books, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now for the question. I've read pretty much everything you have written. Is there a character you would like to write and haven't gotten the chance yet? Personally, I think you would do a killer Daredevil run. Thanks again for your time. Thanks again for
Oh,
your time, Scott. There you go."
oh man, that thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it, and I hope you're doing well. Honestly, like to know that anything we did helped anyone through a tough time really means a lot. There's so many characters that I'd love to write. I mean, I'd love to write Spider-Man and Hulk, and I'd love to write Daredevil. Daredevil feels like, again, like he's very different than Batman from Bruce, because I feel like Bruce sort of starts from a place of confidence. He's like very sure of himself, even though he has this trauma in his background. He's like, I can do it. And then you kind of push him down, and he gets a little beaten up, and then he's like, I can do it again. Like comes back. Whereas Matt Murdock has that kind of Catholic guilt and the worry of like, should I be doing this? Am I good at this? Am I? And then he has the confidence. So I'd love to try a different take. He's almost a little more Dick Grayson than Bruce Wayne. So yeah, there's so many. Captain America is another one I'd love to write. Wonder Woman I'd love to write one day in a big way. I mean, yeah, there's too many characters, from Detective Chimp all the way up to Spidey and whatever, that I would do. So there's so many.
Is there any genre or archetype, or I mean, you don't have to get into specifics or calling out any character names, but is there anything that you tend to stay away because you're just like, it's not my wheelhouse. I'm not, it's not my strong suit. Like, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the best. I don't know why. Like I tend to veer away from comedy or romance or characters in that. Not because I don't like. I love watching it or reading it. I'm just not. I don't know. I like horror has always been my genre, and superhero stuff. I think what I like about it is horror at core is like conflict writ large, because like if when it's done right, like the monster you're up against is like an extension of your worst fear, right? And so horror to me just kind of puts like the thing you do in drama where it's all sublimated and subdued like out there and exposes it. So it's like, this is the thing you're afraid of. Let's stop beating around the bush, and it has fangs and it's trying to kill you. And superhero comics like usually gives that thing superpowers and it's coming after you. And so you know, I gravitate towards those big epic kind of nonstop, very, you're up against your thing you never want to look at, but now you have to fight. And so I've never really gravitated toward. Barnstormers weirdly was the first like romance kind of thing that I had done.
Hmm.
So outside of that, I want to try things like I'm not good at, but or I don't know how to do as well. But those are the genres I'm always maybe least inclined to do. But part of the experiment was doing that with Comixology, try things you haven't, right? So Dudley Dotson is like both a comedy and a YA kind of book with Jamal Igle that I'm really proud of. And again, romance and historical fiction was Barnstormers. So Yeah, and so is the book I'm doing with my son, like By a Thread is YA. It's kind of more of an adventure
Oh,
book.
cool.
It's a little more comedic and dark, but it's got like it's lighthearted in its own way. So yeah, trying to push yourself, but those are the things I'm not the best at
Okay.
or not the most inclined towards, I guess.
No, I appreciate the honesty, and I want to get back to I want to get circle back to the comicsology stuff after we get done with these questions because I've got a burning one that I've been dying to ask. But big shout out to Mac for that for sending in that question. The next question I got from you that I got for you comes from a previous guest of the show. I had him back on in 2021, but I think there's a connection, a direct line to you because he was part of your inaugural comics writing class. This next question comes from Ben O'Grady. Ben O'Grady. I
Yes,
reached out. Go ahead.
I remember. Yeah.
Oh, what? Okay, yeah. So Ben sent me a question for you, and he wants to know: you launched American Vampire with co-writer Stephen King. If you could pick another superstar writer to launch a new book with, who would it be? And you can't pick Stephen King again.
Oh man, that's what I would probably have said with Stephen King. Um, oh, who would I do it with if I could launch with another superstar writer? That is tough. There are writers I'd love to work with in comics. Like, I mean, I would love to work with Grant again. I had such a good time in the small amount we did together, Grant Morrison. I mean, I've always wanted to meet and talk to Alan Moore. I'd like learn at his feet. I feel like, you know, uh, I I don't know. There's so many writers I wish I had met, or I wish like the couple I met and I never got to know well, like Denny O'Neil, or so the people that I can think of people like I would love to learn from. I'll tell you who, writing wise, Chris Miller and what's the team? Now I'm blanking on his partner. I can't believe I'm forgetting. Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who do so many great
Oh,
animated.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, from Spider Verse to Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Clone High. They're writers I would love to learn from. They're amazing. So I don't know. There's so many people out there I wish I could meet that just, sort of that are inspiring to me. So yeah.
What would you say is when you think back during your time writing American Vampire and then working with Stephen King, which the more I think about your story, which you've kind of admitted, like your story is really impressive in terms of like how quick the ball got rolling into your career, and I mean thinking about like you had a chance to work with Stephen King on your first, foray into comics, which is insane. But when you think back to that time, like what would you say is the most important lesson or biggest, most impactful lesson that you learned from Stephen King when it comes to like writing? Did he ever drop any jewels on you or give you any advice that still sticks around or still sticks with you?
Yeah, man. I mean, he was amazing. He always like messed with you and joked around and was hilarious and wonderful. But I remember seeing him on a panel he invited us to that he did for the New Yorker Festival, and somebody asked him and Martin Amis, they were like, how do you know when a story has sort of gone wrong? And he was like, you know it in your tummy. I was like, that's just right. You just feel it in there. And yeah, it was just great. I mean, he was always just the small pieces of advice, like the way he acts, like he invited my wife and me once to stop by. He was in Florida and we were driving by and he had heard we were driving through Florida he was joking around with him and he was like, come by the house. And so we came and visited him in Sarasota, um, where he had a house at that time. And, he made us spaghetti and was just like, move that piece of shit off the table when we came over. And it was the big manuscript for Under the Dome.
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh my god, this book is this new book." And just the way that he was so humble and self-deprecating was a lesson in itself that way, where he always, sort of made fun of himself and was always made you feel at home knowing he was Stephen King, So that too.
Have you ever had a chance to meet his son, Joe Hill, at all?
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
Oh,
Joe's
awesome.
great. He's
Yeah,
amazing.
I had a chance to
Owen too. Owen is fantastic.
yeah, he came to Jacksonville for a book fair, and I had a chance to do the panel with him, and then I had him on the show. And it's awesome to hear that, you know, a lot of things that you're saying about Stephen King, the same with Joe. Like, he's very self-deprecating, funny as hell, entertaining, super nice. So it's cool to know that the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree.
Yeah, that our whole family is fantastic.
All right, so that was from Ben O'Grady. Big shout outs to Ben. Appreciate the
Yeah,
question.
thanks, Ben.
All right, I've got one last question that
Sure.
I am confident that this is coming from probably the biggest Batman fan out there. Huge fan of yours. I mean, he owns a shop called Gotham City Limit Comic Shop. So, as you can imagine, he's
Nice.
been dying to send this in. This comes from Ben Kingsbury, who is the owner of Gotham City Limit, the sponsor of this year's show, great friend of the show, a big Batman fan, as you can imagine. Instead of sending in a question, I mean, he's a sponsor, so he gets special treatment. He actually sent in a voicemail for you, Scott. So I'm going to play it for you.
Nice.
Hey, Scott, Ben K, Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville, Florida here. Thanks so much for taking time to be here today. Let me start by saying I was on the retailer Zoom meeting with DC when you spoke about DC's All In and Absolute Batman, and the passion you had that day about the All In initiative and wanting to write your best story and wanting all the other writers to write their best story ever was inspiring, and another awesome reminder of why we even have a local comic shop in the first place. So thank you. Now, on to my question. My personal favorite DC stories are the Elseworld style stories, and it looks like the Absolute series will continue on with more great storytelling. If you could take any character you've ever written from any publisher and give them the absolute treatment, which way are you going? I'll leave you to answer. Thanks again. And remember, Short Box Nation, always take it to the limit.
Big shout outs to Ben. I love it.
That's great. Yeah, no, man, if I could give anyone else the absolute treatment, probably Captain America. He's the character that I think about the most at Marvel. I have this like I've had a couple big stories in my head for him. But Ghost Rider maybe is the other one. I have like a whole idea for Ghost Rider. So those at Marvel. At DC, I feel like I'm sort of too intimidated by how great the ideas are for Superman and Wonder Woman right now to even think in those terms. But yeah, I'm gonna stick with Absolute Batman at DC, and
Love it.
that's it. But I really appreciate it.
Hell yeah. On the topic of that, in a semi, almost not really related way, but I'm going to shoehorn this in anyways. There was a Screen Rant. I think there was an article. I want to make sure I get it right. I want to say it's Screen Rant. Yeah, it's Screen Rant. So I think last week Screen Rant put together an article, and it was called 10 Best DC Comics by Scott Snyder to Read Before Absolute Batman, which to me is always a sign that, you know, like that thing is going to be big if they need to prep you for said release. And I think Absolute Batman warrants maybe getting, like, you know, into that headspace and revisiting some of your other work and, you know, classic work. And, you know, I guess spoiler alert, I'm about to share the article itself, but Scott, I want to hear, what would you add to this list that you feel maybe personally would kind of round it out, or you would also recommend, like, hey, you know, to prep for Absolute Batman, even though it's a completely different thing, maybe just get you in the headspace. So among the list of 10 best DC comics by Scott Snyder to read before Absolute Batman, they've got, and I don't know if it's any particular order, I just wrote it down as I seen it, but you've got All-Star Batman, Batman Endgame, Batman Zero Year, Dark Knight's Metal, Dark Knight's Death Metal, The Batman Who Laughs, Death of the Family, Batman Last Night on Earth, The Black Mirror, and Court of Owls. Is anything missing for you personally?
That's a hard one.
It's a pretty comprehensive list, I gotta say.
Yeah, I mean, other than this, I mean, I think I'm trying to think what they left off. Like Gates of Gotham, I'm really proud of. That was the one that I wrote with Kyle Higgins that I really love. I think Super Heavy again is the one that I'm citing that Joker Batman moment from, that I had a blast with. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that definitely, I don't know. I can't think of anything that I'm trying to think of something that I'm missing that's on that didn't make it on there. That's a lot
Well,
of Batman.
yeah.
Yeah.
You have written, I don't know, Scott, if you know this, but you've written a lot of Batman. And as I said,
A couple shorts.
yeah,
The Joker short that we did in the Joker 80th anniversary, I'm really proud of. Me and Jock. It's a short piece, but it kind of gets to the heart of what I think the Joker is. And then also, I did a story in Batman Black and White with John Romita that I'm really proud of, about the first photograph ever taken of Batman. That's kind of a small one. And then another short that I did I think it was in the Detective Comics anniversary. It was with Sean Murphy, and it has the idea of the first idea that became Last Night on Earth, where it introduces the notion that our Batman from Greg and my run would create a machine that would essentially make sure there was always a Batman throughout for every era of Gotham, and I'm really proud of that one. So those three ones, I would say maybe round it out for me a bit.
that Sean Murphy one, I feel like you just unlocked the memory. That is a really good one. So when I read Last Night on Earth, I was like, oh, there's a really cool like similarity and parallel here. But you just brought up Sean Murphy, who, is made a huge splash with, oh my God, I'm now drawing a blank. Dark Knight? No, not White Knight? Batman White Knight? What
Yeah,
is Sean?
White Knight, yeah.
White Knight. Thank you so much. And I'm curious to hear from you, which, a lot of, that's considered an Elseworld story. What's your favorite version of Batman that isn't like the main continuity? Do you have a favorite like Elseworlds Batman or
Well,
variation?
I have so many. Yeah, I mean, I loved like Paul Pope's Batman Year 100. I mean,
Solid choice. Yeah.
I really like Batman Beyond. Is like one of my absolute favorite
Hell
like
yeah.
takes on Batman forever. Uh, there's so many. I mean, I like what's happening in Dark Knights of Steel. I mean, I'm always up for a alternate Batman take. I love Gotham by Gaslight. Who
Yeah.
doesn't like Mike Mignola? But yeah, there's so many. But Year 100 is one of my like hidden gem favorites.
Yeah. I don't think that one gets enough credit, and which is sometimes a shame because it's like, that's Paul Pope, doing auteur Paul Pope doing the damn thing.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to get back really quick to that comicsology thing I was saying, and I wanted to give you props on that deal. Not only was it like, one, it was like, whoa, wait a minute, Scott Snyder is not just doing, one, he's doing a comicsology thing, but he's not doing just like one book. He's doing 8 books, and it's going to be digital first, and then we're going to get the print versions via Dark Horse. And uh, I remember you had an interview with David Harper on Sketch when that deal was announced. And I really respected your perspective on digital comics. As a big fan of digital comics, as someone that nowadays reads a lot of his, comics digitally on the iPad because it just, fits in my lifestyle. I liked your perspective on digital isn't a competitor, or doesn't have to be a competitor to print. Like, I think in the comic space, a lot of fans and maybe even publishers or or even especially retail, like, will pit digital against print, and it's, digital is going to bring down, a physical comics and things like that. But if I recall that article correctly, like, you were kind of expressing the symbiotic relationship between the two, and how we can benefit one. One hand washes the other type of like mindset. And obviously, in this point in time, you've already completed all 8 comics, all 8 projects. I mean, you won an Eisner Award for Barnstormers. Are you looking? I guess coming out of that experience, has your perspective on digital comics changed? Did you learn anything new? Are you going to be doing more like digital first or digital only comics?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting experience. I still believe that I believed it like wholeheartedly going into it, and I still do, that what American comics could really use is digital browsability, especially for
Yes.
young readers, because the price point with print is just, it's too high and it's nobody's fault. It's just printing costs, shipping costs, all these things have ballooned especially after COVID. So in a really boring, sort of factoid way, comics are just too expensive for reasons that, again, aren't sexy or salacious or anything. It's just, the manufacturing and shipping and printing of all of it, of comics. And so for me, I believe like my kids, one of the reasons that manga and other things are becoming so popular is because they're really accessible. Like they're accessible when they're a full volume and you start from the beginning and it's easy. But also they all provide very cheap browsability digitally through Crunchyroll or Shonen Jump or any of that stuff. And I was very excited by the idea of Comixology as a multi-publisher platform that had a huge library of comics that you can browse for just a subscription price. So for the price of like one comic a month or whatever it is, you could literally browse Dark Knight Returns to some comics that are brand new and all this kind of stuff. And I believe in that. I think that during my time at Comixology, it contracted under Amazon. It was a shame like to see. But forces that are again just like way bigger than anything that has anything to do with comics or Comixology. It's more just like when Amazon, as a multinational, like giant global corporation, feels like they need to sort of tighten their belt. Like you never know what's going to happen with these different places. So I think the hard thing was seeing so many people that I thought were real dyed in the wool love of comics people have to look for other places to work. But that said, like the people that are left at Comixology are still really diehard comic people, and they're starting to expand again. And I would encourage everybody to support them. And I still love them and would do books for them. But my hope is that whether they expand again under Kindle or that kind of thing, or another company comes along, or Marvel and DC and Image form some kind of thing with other companies, that there is some large bridge that allows for digital access to a giant library of comics for kids coming in, hoping to explore and fall in love with the medium.
I really appreciate you saying that. I've always felt that digital comics could benefit from having, more creators of your caliber, like, pushing forward and wanting to see changes and different things implemented. Because I want to echo once again what you had said in that article, that digital and print don't necessarily have to compete at all.
Yeah, they don't. They're symbiotic, honestly, in my opinion.
Agreed. All right. Scott, as we start wrapping up this great interview, I want to give you one more chance to talk about Absolute Batman. And I guess I want to give you kind of free reign here, because at this point, you have done a lot of press for, the Absolute Universe, Absolute Batman, All In. And I'm curious to know, is there any topic when it comes to any of those, or a question that you haven't been asked that you personally have wanted to maybe like talk about or give an answer to? Like, is there anything that someone hasn't asked you about Absolute Batman or DC All In at this point?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I feel like I really got to cover it here. I honestly I'm just so excited that people seem to be as enthusiastic as we are about all of these things. I really feel lucky and grateful, and I'm just excited to see people go into shops. I mean, All In was designed around like three things, right? It was like, it's all in the books, meaning like every story is going to be a jumping on point. So every book should be welcoming to you. Like we're all in as a company. We're all out there supporting each other. We're giving it our best, all of it. And then it's all in the stores. And so there's Justice League cards to give out in every store in America, where if you buy 3 or 4 DC comics starting tomorrow or starting Wednesday, October 2nd, they'll give you for free a Justice League card of a different character each week. And we reduce we tried to keep the price points low on these books, like even if they're oversized, all that stuff, to try and be like, what can we do to make the store experience fun? And how do we also make sure that there's offerings every single week for 5, 6, 7 weeks that start new stories over and over again, so that people won't get into this monthly buying habit. Instead, they'll be and go into a store and celebrate comics week after week. So I'm really proud of what it is, and I feel like I've gotten a chance to really promote it. So I'm grateful.
Hell yeah. Well, I want to say the incentives are a great idea. It is refreshing to know that, as a weekly Wednesday warrior, that you guys are looking out for my pocketbook. So thank
Oh,
you for
thanks.
looking out for my wallet. And I guess I want to end this like I always end it when anytime I've got an amazing creator on the show, and looking out for the aspiring comic creators, whether they be writers, artists, etc., that are listening and hoping to strive, that are striving and aspiring to be, the position that you're in. We've talked about, you teaching writing. I mean, you've taught writing at New York University, Columbia University, other colleges. You even offer advice for writing on your Substack. I guess what advice do you have for aspiring writers that are hoping to be, the next Scott Snyder, or to get into the industry? And maybe, if it could be advice that you wish you would have gotten when you first started that would have helped you out in a major way, what would you say?
I honestly, like, it's that same mantra that I say at the beginning of each thing, man. I honestly feel like, the feeling is, the lesson is just like, you got to be honest with yourself and write the book that you would love to read. I spent too many years trying to write things that I thought would impress people, or, that showed off this or that I thought I was good at or whatever, instead of just being like, what's the book I would love to find today? What would mean something to me, even if, it might not be the book that wows everybody else. What is the thing I would care about the most? So that would be the thing I would say is, like, that's how you write something special, is to try and put yourself on the page and be vulnerable and allow yourself to be honest about, like, this is the story that means something to me today, whether it's political or it's memoir or it's just escapist or it's a soap opera, whatever it is, like, write that thing,
Well said. Well said. Ladies and gents, this is the Short Box Podcast, and we just finished talking with Scott Snyder about his newest comic, Batman, or Absolute Batman, which is in shops right now. As you're listening to this episode, hopefully you're on your way back home to open up the book and you're hype about reading it. But Absolute Batman is in shops right now. Absolute Wonder Woman comes out October 23rd, followed up, last but not least, by Absolute Superman, which comes out November 6th. And obviously, there'll be a lot more titles coming out from DC All In and Absolute. As you heard Scott say, the company is all in, the creators are all in. Why not get all in yourself? Check it out. And Scott, I want to say thanks again for hopping on the show. You've been great. And anytime you want to come back on for any new projects, man, the door is open for you. This was fantastic.
Love that, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.